So we're back to end the week in the NBA streets here with another edition of the NBA Parlay. We come off a busy one this week. Now, we were off Thursday and Monday, or Sunday, pardon me. Monday, we did hit. So we're still riding off some nice free roll, man. It's just frustrating, when that thing gets so close and you're like, oh. I will say this. It's another type of basketball, and I will alert and direct you to the Discord at some point because we're on fire over there. 22-6 since Monday in college basketball alone. But that's neither here nor there because you're here for the NBA and an NBA parlay. So also, just so you know, there's this deal we've been telling you about here, the World Cup, $10 into $200. That's ending on Sunday. Today's Saturday. That's it. Last time. Let's start with the Hornets and the Bucks. Now, this one here, I think when you start to look at how wide this can truly get of a spread, little surprise, just a little, that we're dealing with a team here that's only getting 6.5. Some of it might just be the nature in which Milwaukee, they lose a disappointing game last night to the LA Lakers in town. They pick up and they bounce right back, you'd think, right? Second game in as many nights against a Charlotte team that, holy shit, they needed to hold on tight. And it was to some just grip that they had on that game that refused to give up to the Wizards, although they nearly blew a 20-plus point lead. It was 22 at one point. Oh, my God, it was ugly to watch. Gut-wrenching if you had that team in any capacity. I did not, but oh, my goodness. Now, what's the expectation? Well, Charlotte comes off that deflating win, and the Bucks come off that deflating loss. So the balance, the laws of averages here would indicate that the Bucks are going to smash the Charlotte Hornets. I think Charlotte keeps it tight. I think Charlotte, if anything, they've opened up a 3-game homestand here. They return to their confines. You know what they do. There's no secret to it. And I wouldn't be shocked if the Bucks sat a guy or two tonight. I'm honestly, this would be, and that's going to be a theme, I think, at least bookend theme, is I wouldn't be surprised at all if you saw Milwaukee sit somebody or two in any load management capacity. We keep an eye, of course, on any actual injury report. That's different. I'm just saying using this. Like Beauchamp illness is one thing, but just sitting a guy's another. No, I like Charlotte. Keep it close tonight at home. You're getting that hook on the second full possession. So even if it's tight, a couple of fouls there at the end, pushing it to 4 or 5 points, you're still covered even at 6. I think that's the way to jump in first here on our first leg. All right, let's move to the second leg. And we're just going to go not too far down here. This Magic Raptors game,
Okay.
I mean,
I
as
don't even
if
know
we
what this
know what
is.
any other part of the song is supposed to play.
Yeah, I have no idea what song you're playing here.
Oh, this isn't. Jordan did good work with this one. Yeah, Jordan did good. What's happening, everybody? It is time for another Stokastic NFL Tournament Strategy show every Saturday. Myself and Millie Maker winner Neil Orfield, we break down the FanDuel, the DraftKings main slates for Sunday. We go through all of our favorite GPP plays and the best strategies to help you guys win some money in large field tournaments. As you come in, do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're sponsored by Prize Picks today. Neil, how are you doing this weekend?
I'm doing well. This is an exciting time of year because not only do we have the usual excitement of DFS, but now best ball is suddenly mattering, season long stuff. Like we're looking toward the playoffs, kind of have an understanding of what we need in those perspectives. So this is a really fun time of the year for me with NFL. And now, I mean, I know a lot of people are really disappointed about the World Cup ending, but I never got involved in it. I didn't play any DFS running, so it was just that was all over my timeline. I had no idea what people are tilting about. So now I'm a little bit relieved, if I'm being honest, that that's over. How are you doing today, Greg?
I'm doing good. I've enjoyed the World Cup way more than I thought I was going to. I've been betting on it. I've been watching a lot of the games, and I don't really know shit. I generally just look at the 538 model, which has actually been extremely profitable because there's all these spots which I, I guess nobody other than myself is betting a lot of these, but it's a lot of like 15 to 1, 20 to 1 underdogs where it's like their model shows that, well, this team's expected to win 11% of the time. Like I have Australia this afternoon. They're 13 to 1, but their model has them with a 17% chance to win. So it's something that's like a lot of value that I don't expect to win each individual one, but a lot of them have come through, like Saudi Arabia against Argentina's 20 to 1 underdogs. I had Japan at 15 to 1 win their group. So I've only won like 5 or 6 World Cup bets, but because the ones I've bet have had such long odds in general that it's been really profitable. So I have enjoyed it. I'm also doing the DraftKings pools. They ran a World Cup pool where like 75% of the field apparently took the U.S. in the first game. So that was a good start. The Netherlands ended up winning, but it's good. I've enjoyed the World Cup more than I thought I was going to. Best ball. How are your best ball teams doing?
They're doing okay. So I posted about my favorite one on Twitter. I know that's everybody's favorite Twitter content is people posting about their specific teams. I posted my favorite. I have one in the 555 on DraftKings. That's 20 points out of first or out of second. But the second place team has been riddled with injuries. Javonte Williams, Brees Hall, I think Cooper Kupp, like they lost all of their best players. So I think I've got a shot to catch them here in the final 2 weeks. And that would be, I only played a few 33 lineups on DraftKings, one of them in that 555. So I'm excited about that one. And in general, my advance rate's looking pretty good on underdog. So yeah, I'm excited about it.
All right, let's hopefully that also will lead to some money being made this weekend in the NFL main slate. And starting where we normally do, Neil, let's start with our quarterbacks and some of the spots that we're looking to stack around to start our slate and or to start our lineups. And one thing that's kind of interesting about this weekend, there is no quarterback or no team with predominant top stack odds. We only have 2 teams with double-digit odds being the top scoring stack on the slate. One of them is Cincinnati Bengals at 12% on DraftKings. The other is the Chiefs at 11%. And then over on FanDuel, more or less the same stuff, 13% for the Chiefs, 12% for the Bengals. It's really spread out at quarterback. And we've seen some other weeks where some of the top stack odds have been a little bit more concentrated. So how are you, from a strategy standpoint, going to build out your stacks and lineups when we do have it so spread out in terms of teams with best odds to be the top scoring?
Yeah, it's a really interesting week in terms of stacks. I'm looking at the top stack in terms of rating this week. It's a tie between the Bengals and Kirk Cousins. The Viking stack has a 66 rating in the top stack tool, which is, we talked about this last week. I think we had 100 rating last week on the Dolphins. We've seen that a couple times this year. Now the top rating is 66, and then we've got several that are kind of in that 50 to 60 range. So it is pretty interesting. I'll probably be pretty spread out. I'm generally pretty spread out anyway. There are people who just pick like 5 quarterbacks and stack those games and leave it at that. I'm usually a little bit more spread out, and this week it's hard. Like with the flat ratings here, it's hard to choose one stack that I really like above the rest, especially seeing Minnesota up there against the Jets. Like, it's a really tough spot, and they're one of the top stacks here. So yeah, it's an interesting slate. I'm not really not expecting that I'm going to take any major stands with all of those spots that are high totals getting some steam. But it'll be a fun one. Do you see it any differently? Are you taking any major stands among stacks this week?
No, I just wanted to. Well, I'll talk about that in a second. I also want to circle back on last week was a pretty tilting one because the Dolphins stack looked like it was going to destroy. The first half, two is because it's exactly what we wanted to happen. Two is having a big game. All the targets are going to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. I know they weren't the players scoring the touchdowns, but still, we were getting into the start of the third quarter, and Hill had like 85 receiving yards. Waddle had 80. Two was already close to 300-yard bonus. I think this team is going to crush. And what happens? Maybe the earliest I've ever seen starters pulled in an NFL game because Tua didn't even really play the second half. And then even when he was out there, they just kind of ran the ball and grinded it out to the point where also the game kind of got dicey towards the end. I was saying like, oh, are the starters going to have to come back in? Because the Dolphins lead got cut from like 31 points down to 15 and they were punting the ball back. And the starter just never came in. So it was one that it looked like they were going to smash, but then ultimately kind of didn't. But the reason I want to talk about the Dolphins there is less than 1% ownership going to Tua this weekend. And I know it's a really difficult matchup against the San Francisco Giants, and there's price concerns. Tua is expensive. We've got Jalen Waddle's expensive. Tyreek Hill's expensive. If this team is actually going to be less than 1% owned, or at least Tua is going to be less than 1% owned, I love that spot for tournaments. We've seen the kind of upside they have. And I think that I know that the number one thing people are going to say is they're really expensive. I know they're expensive, but I think this team has the ceiling of any other team in the league. And it looks like Tua is going to be one of the least popular quarterbacks on the slate.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great spot for Tua. We get it. Like, yes, we understand that this is a terrible spot in terms of the matchup against San Francisco. I get why people are afraid of it. But if Tua is going to be under 1% owned, yeah, it's as good of a spot as you can find. And currently, we don't have any like smash value. We don't have any like $4,000 running backs who look like sure things. But I think we do have a number of like could get there kind of interesting up. Excuse me. So I think that we're going to find ways to, I have been feeling a little bit under the weather. And of course, right now I'm like, oh God, it's coming up. I'm coughing. I think we're going to be able to find some ways to make it work.
Yeah. And also we'll see, we get to this point in the season where there's only 5 weeks in the NFL season. I think there's a decent chance we could also see more players ruled out tomorrow or tonight. We usually get those Schefter tweets, right around midnight on Saturday nights where they're telling us different players are going to be in or out. That I'm hoping also will open up additional value, make it a little bit easier to get to the Dolphins. But I do plan on building around them yet again this weekend. I want to ask you, Jacksonville Jaguars, we have them as being the most popular stack on the slate. Right now we've got 13% ownership going to Lawrence over on DraftKings. FanDuel, it's a little more muted, but still 11% ownership. He's the second most popular QB over on FanDuel behind Joe Burrow. It's a great matchup against the Lions, but the top stack odds don't really match up with the quarterback ownership that he's getting there. How are you going to handle Lawrence in large field GPPs when it looks like we have him going fairly overowned, but the matchup is clearly great?
Yeah, first I'll start by correcting myself. Apparently I said that Tua was playing against the Giants. But yes, that's just because I had a coughing fit coming on. I couldn't think properly. Yes, Tua is playing against the 49ers. I do know that. And yes, Joe, I do need a beer. Yeah, Trevor Lawrence, man, I played him so much last year. You might not remember this, but I feel like on like 5 different Saturday strategy shows, I was like, Trevor Lawrence doesn't look that great in the tools, but I'm going to try playing him. And of course, Urban Meyer, I didn't realize how bad Urban Meyer was. But I love Trevor Lawrence. I would love to play him here, except as you said, getting 13% ownership with a 5% chance of being the top stack. Don't love that. They do have a 7% chance of being the top point per dollar stack. So obviously looks a little bit better from that metric, but still relatively overowned. So man, I get it. Like I see it. I want to play Trevor Lawrence against Detroit, but if he's going to be that overowned and you're going to be able to get Patrick Mahomes at 6.5% ownership, Tua at under 1% ownership, it's definitely not going to be someplace that I'm over the field, because even if it does hit, which there's 5% chance again that it's a top stack, 7% chance that it's top value stack, relatively high odds there. Even if it does hit, you're going to be competing with so much of the field that it's still going to be really difficult to win. So I'd rather take stabs elsewhere.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at the teams also that we have with top stack odds that are comparable to the Jaguars, and also trying to take teams that are price points that are comparable, because I can't really compare the Dolphins to the Jaguars just from a standpoint of, all right, well, the average price of this stack is $1,500 more expensive. I get why people aren't getting there to the same extent, but the average salary that we have in Jaguar stacks is $5,600 for DraftKings, and that is with them projected for 13% ownership. But then we've got teams around them like the Seahawks, the Browns, the Raiders, the Lions on the other side of this game that have very similar overall odds of being the top scoring stack on the slate, similar salaries, but about half the ownership at the QBs. That's where I'd prefer to kind of spread myself around, is look at the Browns with Deshaun Watson. I think that should be our next talking point, and the Raiders, and then also looking at Jared Goff and Lion stacks on the opposite side of the Jaguars, because I think that that's something that would be a pretty good way to get exposure to the Jaguars, but do it at a little bit lower ownership. Maybe you go Jared Goff as the quarterback in some of those stacks. That seems to offer similar upside. In our projections, actually even more upside for about half the ownership. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm taking the same approach. I really like Jared Goff against the Jaguars. Similarly, great spot for him in that high total environment and coming in at much lower ownership than Trevor Lawrence. He's obviously less exciting than Trevor Lawrence in his second year, kind of coming on looking strong. Doesn't have the rushing upside that Trevor Lawrence has, but definitely have some interest in Jared Goff. And yeah, there's just a lot of different places that I want to spread out. Yeah, Deshaun Watson, you can obviously play that Cleveland stack coming in at just 7% ownership currently. Looks really good. Maybe I'm probably going to go to this Vikings stack. I did not expect to say that before looking at the top stacks. Well, I'm not really that interested in playing the Vikings against the Jets, but I do trust it. And it obviously is a very strong stack with Justin Jefferson in there, TJ Hawkinson really coming on. Adam Thielen hasn't done it a ton this year, but we know he's got that upside. So maybe I'll go to that stack a bit. Yeah, there's just a lot of pretty solid. There are no standout, like this is just a smash spot relative to ownership, other than I guess Miami. But for the most part, there's just a lot of pretty good spots here.
Yeah, and then I want to ask, what do you make of Deshaun Watson? Because I think this is one of the hardest spots to predict on the slate. We know about all his off-field issues. He hasn't played all this year, so we don't know how much that's going to be a factor in terms of also how much practice time has he been able to get in. What is rapport like with the wide receivers? And then I also think there might be the ownership on him that could end up being lower than what's projected, just because people don't want to roster Deshaun Watson. I think that could be a part of it. We saw that and obviously the situations are way different from a morality and a legal standpoint. But for about a year and a half, nobody wanted to roster the Houston Astros because everybody hated them in baseball. And it was one of my favorite teams to stack for baseball because they were always picking up less ownership than projected, and people just didn't want to play them. They were one of the best offense in baseball. I don't know what's going to happen with Deshaun Watson, but if we're just talking about fantasy football purposes, I still have to think the upside is there, and I tend to think the ownership is going to come in lower than expected just because people are not going to want to roster him from a human standpoint. What are you going to do with Watson and Brown stacks in large field tournaments?
Yeah, I try not to let ethical issues inform my decisions in DFS, except for to the extent that they affect the field. So I think that, yeah, Deshaun Watson is interested this week. I get it. I get why people don't want to play him. But as far as DFS goes, you're just trying to make money here. And I think that it's a pretty good spot to try to make some money. Coming in at 7.3% projected ownership, 6.6% chance of being the top value stack on the board. And you can also just, even if you don't want to stack up Cleveland, definitely makes the receivers more interesting. Definitely makes, Amari Cooper, Donovan Peoples-Jones, these guys are going to look better with a better quarterback. Jacoby Brissett has been, pretty serviceable. He hasn't been like the bottom of the quarterback class, but certainly I would expect it to be an upgrade. Again, like you said, though, Deshaun Watson's definitely going to come in rusty. We don't really know what to expect. We haven't seen him play in 2 years. So it's a volatile spot, which oftentimes I like to target these volatile spots in DFS. We do have Deshaun Watson projected for 7% ownership, though. I honestly don't know if we should expect it to be lower because, as you said, people aren't going to want to play him, or if enough people are going to be like, hell yeah, Deshaun Watson's back and he's going to be low owned against Houston, revenge game. There's the revenge narrative. Wouldn't be shocking to me to see him up at like 15% either, to be honest. I think it could go either way, like really high relative to what we expect or low. But even at 7% where we have him currently, looks a little bit overowned. So I don't think it's going to be a spot that I'm really targeting strongly. Also, Houston, although not great against the pass, teams just don't have to pass against them. Generally, teams just like, especially if you have Nick Chubb on your team, like I feel like it's just so much easier just going to hand the ball off. So I don't think that I'm going to be. I think I'm probably going to be under the field on Deshaun Watson.
So, and once again, this is a really difficult situation to parse. My feeling, though, is that he's going to come in with less ownership than what's been projected just because of the human element of this. And the other thing, too, is the Browns suck, right? They're not playing for anything right now. So if I'm trying to add another narrative to this, I totally understand what you're saying. I think in most situations against the Texans, teams are saying, let's run the ball against them as many times as possible. I do wonder if this is a scenario, though, where the Browns are not in the playoff mix. What they're playing for at this point is next year in subsequent seasons. I do wonder if you just let Deshaun Watson throw the ball as many times as possible in this spot just to work off the rust in a plus matchup, because this would be the kind of spot where, I mean, the Browns get up to a lead. Most teams would just run out the clock in the fourth quarter. Maybe this is a particular spot, though, where you let your quarterback keep throwing because he hasn't played in so long.
I mean, that's definitely within the range of outcomes. I think that's a good thought that they might just want to get him, as you said, this is a good spot to knock off some rust. So might as well just let him throw the ball, especially if maybe this is a spot where he'd be more likely to be throwing the ball if they're up by 2 touchdowns at the end, just because they want to be knocking off some rust. Certainly something worth considering, that maybe they play the game differently than you would normally expect.
Yeah, so that's definitely somebody else who I think I'm going to be getting to in my mix at quarterbacks. Is there anybody else that you're looking at that you think is a good contrarian play in large field tournaments at QB?
Yeah, let me sort by ownership here. I mean, Jalen Hurts. I think Jalen Hurts is always in play. We've got him coming in at 4.5% ownership, 7% chance to be in the top stack. Kind of interesting there. He only a 4.3% chance to be in the top value stack. So I guess a little bit of negative leverage as far as that goes, because it is fairly expensive with AJ Brown. But still, I think I'm going to have some interest there. I think both sides of and this isn't really contrarian, I guess, but the Las Vegas and Chargers game, I'm going to have some interest in both Justin Herbert and Derek Carr, both coming in at, under 7% ownership. They both look about neutral. Justin Herbert actually coming in 6% ownership, 7% chance to be in the top stack, a little bit of positive leverage there. But I kind of like both sides of that game. We talked about Tua, so don't need to get into that anymore, but looks phenomenal at low ownership. I don't know. Would you consider playing Lamar Jackson? I think Lamar Jackson might be in play for me against Denver.
So the problem, I mean, it's if I was building out 150 lineups right now, he'd probably be in like, I don't know, 4 or 5% of them, maybe less. One of the issues I have with going up against the Denver Broncos, it's not a good game environment. The Broncos suck. Russell Wilson is terrible now. Like whatever thought we had in the past about last year, was Russell Wilson's finger injury the issue? Was he getting like? I think he's just totally over it now, unless there's some unknown injury we don't know about where he's going to be able to bounce back next year. From what I've seen out of Russell Wilson this year, I think there's nothing left in the tank at all. And I do really worry that, number one, if I'm playing the Ravens, are they going to even have to throw the ball much in the fourth quarter? But then point two, also, who do I run it back with in those kind of lineups? And the Ravens are expensive. I would need a little bit of extra correlation in that lineup. And I'm just not sure I would get to Lamar Jackson from that standpoint, because I just don't think this game sets up well to be a shootout because of how bad the Broncos offense has been. It's totally unredeemable.
Yeah, no, I understand that maybe it's a little bit thin. It's just, it'd be easy to just do Lamar and Mark Andrews and hope that they, hit within 3 quarters. But yeah, I get the concerns there. One other team that I want to bring up, Pittsburgh, just by himself, Kenny Pickett doesn't look all that intriguing. 3.4% projected ownership, 3.1% chance to be in the top stack, but then also a 5.3% chance to be in the top value stack. And as we look at the receiving options, Pat Freiermuth looked really good at tight end. I think Deontay Johnson had a positive leverage score as of Wednesday. I didn't look at it again today yet, but Pittsburgh receivers were looking pretty good. You could just throw Kenny Pickett in there. He's got a little bit of rushing upside. You could even single stack with Kenny Pickett. I think he's rushed for about 200 yards and 3 touchdowns already this year in 7 games. So some positive leverage there against a really bad Atlanta defense. Would you have any interest in Kenny Pickett stack?
Yeah, I think you can make a case for it, especially when you consider them to it's one of those teams that's in the same sort of vein as Trevor Lawrence going up against the Lions, where all the numbers look pretty similar. The salary similar. The top stack odds are similar. The one thing that's different, though, is the ownership on Trevor Lawrence. So I mean, the more we talk about this slate, the more inclined I am to just not play Trevor Lawrence and just play all of these quarterbacks that we have with similar projections and similar top stack odds around them, and then just hope it's not the Jaguars that are the highest scoring team. And I would put the Steelers in that category of pivots off of Lawrence and Jaguar stacks.
Yeah, absolutely. I think viable. Man, there's so many, and I'm coming up with more and more names the longer we're talking about this. I'm looking at Jimmy Garoppolo. We haven't talked about Jimmy Garoppolo in that same matchup with Tua against a worse Miami defense. If we're assuming that Tua is going to be able to score, I mean, that San Francisco offense can certainly put up some points against Miami as well. We have Garoppolo at just 3.4% projected ownership, 3.6% chance to be in the top value stack. That kind of interests me. Taylor Heineke even looks pretty good in our tool. 0.7% projected ownership, 3.5% chance to be in the top value stack. They're going to be relatively inexpensive, just about everybody on the Commanders, and they're playing against a really bad Giants defense. So that one's pretty interesting. And then finally, I don't think we can go without talking about Justin Fields. I mean, he seems, I think he's no longer on the injury report. So Justin Fields is going to be playing. We currently have him projected for 2.3% ownership. Like, maybe we might have some concerns that he's not going to run the ball as much because of the shoulder injury, wants to preserve it. But I think there's also a pretty good chance against this Green Bay defense that's terrible against the run that Justin Fields is just running like he normally would. And at 2.3% ownership, I would definitely have some interest there. How do you feel about any of those options? Anybody you want to touch on?
The one that interests me the most of the players you mentioned right there is Justin Fields. He was somebody who, what was it, 4 weeks in a row? He was the chalk of every single slate, and now he misses one game with a shoulder injury, and now nobody's on him, even though he's coming back to a plus matchup against the Packers. So, yeah, I mean, there's not really compelling reason that I would think people would not want. If you're just somebody who's been playing Justin Fields the last few weeks, I don't understand why somebody would have not wanted to play him this week, but wanted to play him a couple weeks ago when just the ownership's lower. The matchup is still great. I know the price is a little bit more expensive, but it's not anything that's too problematic when you consider the kind of upside that Justin Fields has had. So that's the one that stands out the most to me of the players you just mentioned.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, he's definitely a pretty strong consider. And I have not been playing. I was not playing him at the high ownership against Atlanta and Detroit. And obviously the Detroit game bit me pretty hard, but I think that this is a spot where I might jump in and join the bandwagon a little bit, which as if everybody else is jumping off the bandwagon now, I think it's the time that I want to be on it.
All right, let's talk about the running backs. But first, here's the easiest way to make money this weekend, guys. Sign up at BetMGM, click on the link that we have below. Also, Mike's about to throw it into the YouTube chat. And when you sign up at BetMGM, you're going to get $200 for free. But also be aware that this deal ends on Sunday. So we've got our World Cup offer where you click on that link, you place a $10 bet on any soccer money line for the World Cup for your first bet over at BetMGM, and it is going to pay out $200 no matter what happens in that game. Doesn't matter if your team wins, doesn't matter if they lose, you're going to get paid out $200. But Sunday is the last day of this deal, and then it goes away. So if you've been thinking about signing up BetMGM, you've been on the fence about it, you're running out of time. So sign up now and place your $10 bet to make $200 from BetMGM before the offer expires. Now, running back, this is probably the most different, Neil, that running back has been across DraftKings and FanDuel the entire season. The main reason being is because of the big price discrepancy in ownership on Josh Jacobs across DK and FanDuel. Because on DraftKings, he is the chalk of the slate by far. 24% owned. We also have him with 26% top optimal score. So it looks like it's warranted. But over on FanDuel, he's $9,500 only projected for 13% ownership. So we do have to look at some of these running backs fairly differently across different sites. But starting with DraftKings, how are you going to approach Josh Jacobs as the mega chalk at the position this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great spot against the Chargers defense. Yeah, 24% ownership, but that actually looks good in our tops and our boom bust tool. We've got him at a 26% chance of being optimal. So some positive leverage on Josh Jacobs. The price tag 7,900. We've said it before, like his usage is that of somebody who should be like 9,500. Like he should be up there with like Christian McCaffrey based on his usage and the strength of, I mean, it hasn't been the best offense in the world, but I guess just the usage alone is enough that he should be more than 7,900. And he's got a very good matchup against the Chargers. So I think, 24% seems pretty reasonable to me. If you have 7,900 left over on your roster, why not throw Josh? He seems as good as anybody to throw in there at 7,900. Are you on the same page there?
Yeah, it looks about appropriately owned. It's not anything I think I'd be majorly different than the field on. We've got him being, 24% ownership, 26% optimal odds. And then same on FanDuel as well, where he's a lot more expensive, 9,500. It's funny because you just said that the fair price for Jacobs is probably about 9,500. Well, that is where FanDuel has him priced. So it's obviously going to be way more difficult to get to him over at FanDuel, where he is actually if I'm not mistaken, let me sort by salary here. Yeah, the second most expensive running back over on FanDuel right now. The only one more expensive is Nick Chubb. Chubb at $9,600. When I'm paying up for running back, I would certainly prefer to get to Josh Jacobs than Chubb at those kind of prices. But yeah, I think Jacobs remains a little bit underpriced on DraftKings. FanDuel has it right now at $9,500. If you have the ability to get up to him, that's fine. I wouldn't force it though. I think that $9,500 is a little bit too much to say you have to play Josh Jacobs on FanDuel. If he's in a handful of lineups, that's fine. DraftKings, he's definitely going to be a little bit of a priority though. But if you're looking to pivot and pay up for a different running back who isn't Josh Jacobs this weekend, who is it that you would be going towards?
Some interest in Derrick Henry against an Eagles defense that is very clearly a run funnel defense. Tennessee's wanting to run the ball anyway. We've got Derrick Henry coming in at 12% projected ownership, 16% chance of being optimal. Sign me up for some Derrick Henry. I think he's a very solid pivot off of Josh Jacobs. Nick Chubb, we talked about, doesn't look good at all in the boom bust tool. I think that it's a highly volatile spot, though. As we talked about, I think there is some chance that they just want to run the ball out rather than using their rusty quarterback, just hand the ball off in a game where they don't really need to be throwing the ball at all. So I think there is a game situation where they want to be just running the ball over and over. So I think that Nick Chubb sort of interesting, although we do have pretty massive negative leverage there. 11% projected ownership, 3.5% chance of being optimal. So we've got negative leverage on Nick Chubb. I'd prefer Derrick Henry in a better spot. Austin Eckler, I can always play. We have pretty big negative leverage on Austin Eckler, so not my favorite spot. 18% ownership, 8% chance of being optimal. One of the more negatively leveraged plays on the slate, but always a guy who's live to get 12 targets and, get 10 catches for 5 yards apiece and just put up, 15 fantasy points right there. Christian McCaffrey always in play against this Miami defense. No, doesn't have to worry about Eli Mitchell at this point. He is, I believe, questionable right now, so we don't know if Christian McCaffrey is going to play, but assuming he's a full go at 8,600 in this game environment against Miami, I would definitely have some interest in Christian McCaffrey. Anybody else? Saquon, I don't know, 4.6% projected ownership, 4.1% chance of being optimal. I don't know how much I'm going to go to Saquon against the Commanders. The Giants just have a 19.25 implied team total. The ownership seems low for a player of his caliber, but the spot isn't great. So I think that if I had to rank them, the players that are, 7,900 and above, not including Josh Jacobs. I think Josh Jacobs would probably be number one for me, followed by Derrick Henry.
Same.
Followed probably by Christian McCaffrey, then Austin Eckler, then Nick Chubb, then Saquon.
Yeah, on the high end for me, the players I'm going to be prioritizing are Josh Jacobs and Derrick Henry. And something with the Eagles, so their run defense considerably worse than the pass defense. Pass defense, they're top 5 in defensive pass defense DVOA, 24th in rush defense DVOA. I know they've tried to shore it up. They signed Linval Joseph, they signed Ndamukong Suh last week, but these guys are 34 and 35 years old respectively. It's hard for me to think at these kind of ages. And by the way, guys, it's not like they were playing somewhere else. These were players who were pseudo retired. It's hard for me to think that's all of a sudden a massive game changer. So I think Derrick Henry is going to get a ton of touches this weekend. And this could be one of those spots where we're looking at 30, 35 touches for Derrick Henry. That kind of volume, I think, could help him get there. So on the high end, my priorities are going to be Josh Jacobs and Derrick Henry. Going to the mid-range now, I'm surprised how much ownership Travis Etienne is getting. And not because he hasn't been great this year, but because he got hurt last week and only carried the ball twice. I just don't know what that means for this weekend. I know he's a great matchup against the Detroit Lions, but I just don't know if I could count on him for a full workload. It's definitely something where I think I need a little bit more information on. I want to see how we see some of the, by the way, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Drew Holiday were both ruled out for the Bucks. So if you guys have access to a sports book, go bet against Milwaukee Bucks right now. But I don't really understand how much ownership is going to Etienne until we get more information, because it seems like a very uncertain spot.
Yeah, it's definitely a follow the news kind of spot. Like if we get, if reports come out that Travis Etienne is a full go tomorrow, I'm going to have interest at 6,400 against this Lions defense. He has had games where he just gets a ton of workload. So, yeah, it all comes down to following the news. And maybe if we don't get any reports, then I think we just have to go with what the tools are telling us, which is 18.5% projected ownership, 13.5% chance of being optimal. I would be underweight to the field on Travis Etienne because I think the range of outcomes is pretty large here. But if we do get news that he's a full go, he's going to look pretty fantastic against this Lions defense.
Yeah, and it's clearly a very good spot if he goes and he's unrestricted. I would just want to see that in a report somewhere that Etienne does not have any kind of restrictions, because or else I would definitely have some sort of concerns. Who else are you going to be trying to get to in the mid range of running backs?
Yeah, so in the mid range, I mean, Miles Sanders looks pretty good in the tools. 4.5% ownership, 4.8% chance of being optimal. I guess fairly neutral. Tennessee's defense is not my favorite defense to target, but looks okay. David Montgomery, I've been playing him. Chicago facing a really bad run defense on the Packers. David Montgomery, 6,200. No Khalil Herbert to worry about. I think I'm going to go right back to David Montgomery. The field is to 10% projected ownership, but we see 14% chance of being optimal at 6,200. I do think that David Montgomery is, again, a solid play against this Packers defense. He, could see 20, 25 carries, get 100 yards and a touchdown. Wouldn't be shocking against this defense. So I'm going to have interest in David Montgomery. Najee Harris actually looks really good. He's expected to play in this game, 3.7% projected ownership, 8.9% chance of being optimal against this really bad Falcons defense. Man, I did not expect to ever play Najee Harris again. Once Jaylen Warren was picking up steam, I was like, thank God I never have to worry about Najee Harris again. They've accepted that he's just bad, but he's actually been, I think, running better recently. Like he's been at least putting up good fantasy scores. And at 6,100 against this really bad Falcons defense, probably have some interest at Najee Harris in the mid range. Jeff Wilson Jr., I don't know. Raheem Mostert's coming back this week, so that should cut into. I would expect it's going to be kind of a timeshare there, but I don't think we really know what they're going to do with both of these guys, healthy and active in a game. We've seen it before, but Jeff Wilson was brand new to the team, so I don't know who I'd expect to be the lead back here. But Jeff Wilson at 6,100, we have him at 2% ownership, 4% chance of being optimal. So I'll have some interest there. These are the guys that are standing. Oh, Dameon Pierce against that really bad Cleveland defense. We've got him at 14.4% projected ownership, 17% chance of being optimal though. So we actually have positive leverage on Dameon Pierce. He's put up some real stinkers recently, but it's as good a spot as you're going to find. So I'll have some interest there. Whoever is active for Washington against the Giants, Antonio Gibson, I think did not practice yesterday. Maybe I don't know if I'm correct on that report, but if Antonio Gibson is active at 5,200, I'll have some interest. But I do think Brian Robinson has been clearly taking over as the bell cow back for Washington. So especially if Antonio Gibson is out, I think Brian Robinson at 5,300 in a good matchup where he's going to get a ton of workload, or I would expect him to get a ton of workload. I might have some interest in Brian Robinson. Anybody else that's standing out to you, or any of those guys you want to talk about?
It's also, a lot of them is going to be dependent on some of the news. Like, so Antonio Gibson, the most recent on him, I'm going to pull it up because I think what the latest reports I saw is that he was trending towards not playing, but I'm just going to pull up the news to see what, if anything, has changed about Antonio Gibson, if something's come out while we've been doing the show or this morning. Didn't practice on Thursday. Yeah, it looks to me like Gibson is not going to be playing this weekend, which would definitely make Brian Robinson look a lot better. Something else too, that, and I know this isn't directly related to the mid-range, but I think our projection is a little bit low on Zonovan Knight, just from a standpoint of he played such a big role last week for the Jets. He's my favorite punt play on the entire slate. If we're going really cheap on DraftKings or FanDuel, Zonovan Knight, I didn't know who the hell this guy was last week. I don't know if you were on the same page. I've never heard this guy's name in my life before. As far as I'm concerned, he's a player who's created in Madden in one of those drafts. He just came up, was like, hey, here's Zonovan Knight. Seems like a NPC computer created name. He played a huge role last week. He had 3 targets in the receiving game. He had 14 rushing attempts. Now, that's also with Michael Carter not getting hurt until around halftime. So what would his workload have been like had Carter not started the game? It could have been really, really significant. I love getting to Knight, and I know that we have him as being negatively leveraged right now, but I just don't think our projection on him is high enough. Because 8% of Zonovan Knight to me is not high enough considering how cheap he was and what his role was last weekend.
Yeah, so I'm actually on the same page as you with Zonovan. I talked about him on the Wednesday show with Lofty. He's only 4,600, and yes, I'm expecting James Robinson to play in this game. But James Robinson, from what I understand, from what I read, James Robinson could have played in the last game. He was inactive because they wanted to inject some life into the running game. So they made Zonovan Knight active because they thought he might have a chance to, pick up the running game a little bit for the Jets. And then he did. So like they put him in, they activated Zonovan Knight and deactivated James Robinson because they thought Zonovan Knight could inject some life into the offense. Then he had a great game. I don't see them now going, okay, well, let's now without Michael Carter, let's start James Robinson instead of Zonovan Knight. It seems more likely to me that, I guess regardless of who starts, that Zonovan Knight is the guy that they're going to want to give more carries to. Of course, we only have a 1-game sample size. He wasn't like a high draft pick or anything like that. So it's definitely volatile. If he comes out and rushes 3 times for 6 yards, there's a good chance that they do replace him at that point. But I do think the range of outcomes is high. And I think most likely they're going to give the first crack to Zonovan Knight for any real volume here. So I like the call a lot against, the Vikings defense. Not very good this year. They're pretty middling, and the price is right on Zonovan Knight at 4,600.
Yeah, and to me, at least, if we're going really cheap at running back, he's the one that makes the most sense to me. He is $4,600, like we mentioned, over on DraftKings. FanDuel is only $5,800 and projected for 2% ownership. Oh, no, sorry, 7%. I was looking at the wrong side, but still 7% ownership at $5,800 on FanDuel, 4,600, 8% on DK. It's too cheap of a price tag, not enough ownership. I'm going to be playing Zonovan Knight quite a bit as a punt play. Anything that we've not talked about the running back position that's going to be a priority for you?
We can talk about Joe Mixon, maybe a little bit of interest there. Nice pivot off of Joe Burrow. If you're going to be playing, if a lot of people are going to go to the Cincinnati stacks, you could consider Joe Mixon at 7,100. He hasn't really had a ton of blow up spots. He's obviously had that one game where he scored 5 touchdowns, but other than that game, he hasn't been that great, but he looks okay. 12% ownership, 10% chance of being optimal, a little bit of negative leverage there. So you can at least consider him, throw him into your player pool. I'm going to be off of Samaje Perine with Joe Mixon back. Yeah, I don't know if there's anybody else that really stands out to. I'm always a sucker for AJ Dillon when the Packers have a great matchup and the price is right. Great matchup against the Bears. AJ Dillon's only 5,600. I'm probably going to go back there again this week. 1.5% projected ownership, 2.1% chance of being optimal. He's let me down 10 times already this year. So what's one more? I think I'm going to go back to AJ Dillon at 5,600 against the Packers. And then Isaiah Pacheco. I'm kind of surprised to see how low both the ownership is and then also the optimal odds. So we've got him at 3.5% ownership, 1.3% chance of being optimal. He has been the bell cow for the Chiefs recently, and he's only 5,700. So if he's only 3.5% owned, I don't know. I kind of think that he's another one that I may think that he has higher than a 1.3% chance of being optimal. Do you think I'm misreading that, or do you see it the same way?
No, I think Pacheco, I do prefer Zonovan Knight just because he is so much cheaper, but still Pacheco is also very, very cheap. And it looks like he's cemented himself as the guy for the Chiefs. And we know the Chiefs have one of the, if not the best offense in football. So let me pull up Pacheco's usage in recent games. But the last couple of games, if I'm not mistaken, it's been pretty significant. I'm just going to pull up all his carries right now. And then also, we don't have to worry about Clyde Edwards-Helaire at all right now. And I didn't understand the Clyde Edwards-Helaire thing was really weird before because he stopped playing. And then Andy Reid said, it's not a football related thing, but also said he was a great kid. It wasn't related to Orfield. So like, what's the reason he's not playing? But whatever it is, Pacheco has cemented himself as the go-to guy for the Chiefs. And he's been a lot better than what Clyde Edwards-Helaire was for this team from an efficiency standpoint. So 4.7 yards per carry this year for Pacheco, but also the usage. 22 carries last week. That's massive. 15 the week before, 16 the week before that. That's a lot of touches. Unfortunately, he's not really getting passing game work. That's going to Jerick McKinnon right now. But even with that said, if we're going to be getting 16, 20, as high as 22 carries for Pacheco, I think that's worthwhile.
And they keep saying that he's a capable pass catcher. Like they keep saying that he could be involved more. He has not been so far, but maybe one of these weeks they start to involve him more. One more situation that it's kind of thin, but I'm going to throw it at you. The Rams are against the Seahawks defense that isn't great. Maybe Kyron Williams, maybe they've finally kind of unleash him instead of going back to Cam Akers. Give Kyron Williams a few more opportunities at a pretty low price tag and low ownership. I might take a few shots there. Not somebody that I'm going to be jamming into lineups, but maybe a few shots there.
Yeah, I think that definitely does make sense to me. Anything else you want to talk about at running back, or can we move on?
No, I think we can move on.
All right, so let's tell people the best ways to get access to all the tools and all the data we have at Stokastic for cheap. First, 3-day free trial. If you guys haven't signed up yet, want to check out everything we have, 3 days for free. Just click on the link we have below. But also, we're sponsored by Prize Picks today. And when you guys sign up at Prize Picks for the first time using our link, you get 1 free month of Stokastic Plus Platinum. That is going to give you projections, ownership projections, and tools for every single DFS sport out there. So you have your football covered, but also basketball, baseball, and that gets going again. Hockey, we've got all the sports covered over at Stokastic. 1 month for free when you sign up at Prize Picks with our link, but also you're going to get up to a $100 bonus with your first deposit at Prize Picks when you use that link. So a lot of value to be had there when you're signing up at Prize Picks, and we have all the tools you need over at Stokastic to build winning player prop cards over at Prize Picks. We've got our Prize Picks player prop tool, which looks at all of the different props on Prize Picks and gives you percentage odds of each of those hitting on the over and the under. Let's talk about wide receivers and just general broad picture. Do you think this is a slate where you're going to be more apt to spend up at wide receiver, be in the mid-range, or go a little bit cheaper? We've seen wide receivers, particularly on DraftKings, be a lot more expensive this season than in previous years.
Yeah, I mean, so I see the top option on the day is 7,100 Amon-Ra St. Brown. So I guess that is paying up a little bit. T. Higgins also looks very good. One of our top optimal odds at 7,200. So I guess I would say paying up is probably what we're doing with the wide receivers and maybe going a little bit cheaper. I do think that there are some interesting kind of value wide receivers as well, though. So it's sort of a hard question to answer because I think I like different receivers across the board. Do you see it differently? Are you just going to be, do you think paying up or paying down, or what's your plan?
Yeah, I'm going to be going cheaper wide receiver this week. Amon-Ra St. Brown at the high end. He's chalky. Seems warranted. He's projected for 26% ownership with 29% optimal odds. I think if we go back to the start of the year, how many weeks has Amon-Ra St. Brown been one of my most favorite wide receivers? It's been a lot of them for me, kind of regardless of what his ownership is. He's been somebody that I've ridden quite a lot this year, and I don't think this weekend is going to be any different. Over on FanDuel, a little bit more expensive, still project for 26% ownership, a little bit negatively leveraged, but nothing that's too problematic. So I do like Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's not paying up all the way wide receiver, 7,100 on DK, 8,000 on FanDuel. That's probably about as high as I'm going to go as far as a priority is concerned. If we're going cheap, Garrett Wilson, I still think makes sense. I played a bunch of him last weekend, and anybody who's not Zach Wilson at quarterback for the Jets, it's a big upgrade. Zach Wilson sucks, and Garrett Wilson saw a massive upgrade from Mitch White being the starting quarterback there. But I also have a little bit of a pivot. Where is Elijah Moore this weekend? Is anybody playing Elijah Moore?
Where is Elijah Moore?
Because he actually...
Yeah, so he's 3,700 for Elijah Moore. That's okay. 1.3% projected ownership, 0.2% chance to be an optimal. So he just does not look good in the tools at all. But yeah, maybe not factoring in enough the change at quarterback here.
He's a very hard player to project because it's very rare that somebody will go from, well, the idea of Elijah Moore coming into the season was that he was going to be a really high upside fantasy wide receiver for the Jets this year. Not only did that not come to fruition, he wasn't even playing for them for a really long time. And now he got back into the mix last week and showed his talent again. And I know that Garrett Wilson is still the guy, and I like getting to Wilson this weekend, but I think Elijah Moore is one of the stronger leverage / pivot plays we have on the slate, because I think Moore is going to play a big role again this weekend. And I think that he's probably about equally talented to Garrett Wilson. So I even think double stacks of Mitch White with Wilson and Moore makes sense. That's also super salary efficient. You can basically play whoever you want at every other position with that being a case. So those are the guys across the different pricing ranges that I like the most. Amon-Ra St. Brown if I'm paying up, Garrett Wilson in the mid-range, and then Elijah Moore if I'm punting. Nobody's playing Elijah Moore, and he was somebody who was so highly hyped at the beginning of the year. And I honestly think whatever anybody thought about Moore prior to the season, they should probably be thinking about it now.
I actually really like that call. I'm going to talk about my best ball teams again here. My two highest owned quarterbacks this year, Trey Lance and Zach fucking Wilson, was my had 15% of each of them. They're my highest owned quarterbacks. What I would give to turn all those shares just into Mike White right now, Zach Wilson into Mike White. I would love to do that so much. Also, I was just looking at my Jets exposures. I have like 30% Garrett Wilson and like 3% Elijah Moore, because he was going in like the 5th round in best ball drafts, Elijah Moore. And I was like, I'm not going to buy Elijah Moore that early. Like, I kind of see them the same, and I can get Garrett Wilson like 6 rounds later. So I was just buying in Garrett Wilson instead of Elijah Moore. But now with Mike White in there, after seeing what Elijah Moore did last week, he's 3,700. I actually really like that call. I think I'm going to be with you on Elijah Moore this weekend. If the field isn't going to go there, I think that it is just a very big change. And yeah, it's hard to account for that in projections, but definitely an interesting spot for Elijah Moore this week. So I think I'm going to join you on that mission.
Yeah, the one thing that's really hard about projections is you just have to give one rate to somebody, right? A set amount of time they're going to be on the field. It's also really hard with basketball, because I've done, my own form of basketball projections for a lot of years now. Is you're only giving one set of minutes to a player. It's not like if a guy is really highly volatile, they get into a lot of foul trouble. You can't say, well, I'm going to project him for 16 to 34 minutes today. You just have to give them one number. And that's kind of what I think happens with Elijah Moore here is you have to give him one set amount of playing time. And I just think it's such a wide range of outcomes. I'm focusing on the ceiling for tournaments, and Elijah Moore's ceiling, particularly for its price point, is really high. So as far as there's some contrarian guys I really like on the slate, a couple of them from the Jets, Zonovan Knight and Elijah Moore being the other one. So that's something I really like to differentiate some lineups. Who are the other wide receivers that you're eyeing for this weekend?
Actually, before we get there, so Mitchell Mayhouse earlier was asking about Mike White, and I pointed out that so in the top stack tool, Mike White is 5%, project for 5% ownership, and we have him like 3% chance of being the top value stack or something like that. It's some negative leverage there, but I mean, if you're talking about Elijah Moore and using some of these other, would you consider doing a jet stack and throwing in like a guy like Elijah Moore who's not going to get a ton of ownership? That seems like a very cheap stack. Do you have any interest in doing that kind of stack, Greg?
Oh, absolutely. And the other thing too is if you're playing somebody like Elijah Moore in your lineup who's projected for one, it doesn't matter who the ownership is on any other player in that lineup. You only need one player to really be contrarian to set the lineup apart. You don't need 8 contrarian players in your lineup. You don't even need 3. If you have one player they're rostering at 1% owned, you can play all the chalk at other positions. And that's something that I really like about this slate is there are individual players that I've been able to look at and be like, I could really make a case for liking this guy in large field tournaments at almost no ownership, like Elijah Moore. And then, all right, Josh Jacobs is going to be really popular. A lot of people are playing him. All right, cool. I still have a contrarian lineup with Josh Jacobs. So he really enables me to get to some of the chalk like Jacobs, Amon-Ra St. Brown that I like and still have contrarian lineups.
Okay. Yeah, I like that call. I think I might actually have some interest as well. I was also just, as we were talking about this, I remembered, so Tad Radunsky Photography asked earlier, can you guys please talk about single entry and optimal stacks there? We will go over our favorite stacks at the end of the show. So that's something we will cover there. I don't think that the Jets are going to crack mine, but definitely it's somebody that I'm increasingly a little bit interested as we're talking about Elijah Moore. Like, yeah, you're right. You do that stack, Mike White with Elijah Moore. You can play whoever you want in the rest of your lineup, and you're already going to be pretty contrarian, most likely. As far as other receivers that are contrarian, Allen Lazard, 2.8% projected ownership. We have him optimal 9.6% of the time. I actually really like Allen Lazard here. I think that everybody else is going to want to go to Christian Watson, who we had him project for low ownership. What do we have? We have him up to 7.5% ownership now. That seems a little bit more realistic than where we had him earlier in the week. But Christian Watson's just been scoring touchdowns every single game the past few weeks. Now he's up to 7.5% ownership. I still think Allen Lazard is the wide receiver one there. Maybe that's crazy. Maybe Christian Watson is getting to the point where he's just shown so much talent that they're going to use him in the red zone. But Allen Lazard played 100% of snaps in the last game for the Packers, now in a great spot against the Bears defense. And we've seen Christian Watson's ownership going up. We haven't seen the same thing for Allen Lazard. As I said, coming in at 3% ownership with a 10% chance of being optimal. He's 5,400 against the Bears defense. Going to have some interest in Allen Lazard here. Do you think you'll be joining me there?
No, and I could understand some of the reason for Lazard, but kind of before what I talked about when I was talking about how washed Russell Wilson is, I think a lot of the same goes for Aaron Rodgers. Rodgers is also pretty washed this year. I have not played Aaron Rodgers in any lineup. I can't even remember the last time I played Aaron Rodgers. Well, other than like a showdown game they were in, because then you kind of don't have options. You have to be on the Packers offense to some extent. But beyond that, it's been a long time since I've any interest in Aaron Rodgers. He's looked terrible this year. And also, he's hurt right now, but not like a little hurt, significantly hurt. He's got that broken thumb, which people are reporting it's more significant than what it's been led on. So I think that could be what some of his poor performances are attributed to. But I have big concerns about, number one, Rodgers' age and the injury. So I'm kind of off the Packers at this point with those considerations.
Okay. What about the running backs? Are you just off the Packers passing game because of Rodgers, or are you off the running backs because you don't think they'll be able to move the ball?
I mean, I haven't played the running backs in general this year just because both Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon, it's not like either of them have been tremendous value running backs in any individual slate. And then the Packers offense, to the question you'd asked for, it's also just largely sucked this year. And it's hard to get value out of those running backs when the team doesn't score. And that's just kind of been the case for the Packers a lot this year. So really cheap price point on Allen Lazard. He does pop up as being positively leveraged. So I could see the case from that standpoint, but there's other wide receivers I personally believe I'm going to be getting to.
Okay. Yeah, that's reasonable. He just looks very good in the top stacks tool. I just realized that the reason that I keep going to AJ Dillon week after week is because the NFC North is so bad against the run. Like every team in the NFC North is bad against the run. So AJ Dillon, I'm like, oh, once again, now they're going against the Bears. This is such a great spot. He's had great spots so many times this year and he keeps disappointing me. But again, I think that I am going to be going back there to the Packers again, just because the matchup is so juicy against the Bears. And that obviously includes Allen Lazard. We talked about, these Miami receivers, how expensive they are, but how we also, you can stack them up. So we've got Tyreek Hill at 8.5% projected ownership, 8.5% chance to be an optimal, but you throw him in there with Tua and suddenly you're contrarian because Tua is getting under 1% projected ownership. So I think that you can certainly play some Tyreek Hill, and obviously even without Tua, he's going to look great. He's just been a monster this year, like week after week. You can kind of count on Tyreek Hill to have a big game. Obviously better if he does play the fourth quarter, but still you can count on Tyreek Hill. I'm trying to find Jalen Waddle here now. Usually they are.
Yeah. So Jalen Waddle at $7,400 is projected for 3% ownership over on DraftKings with 3% top stack odds. He's $7,900 over on FanDuel with the similar ownership and top stack odds. So he's definitely a little bit pricey. But this is where guys like I'd be working in, Elijah Moore and some of those other cheap options that we've talked about to enable me to pay up for Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and Tua.
Okay. What about so another? We talk about this situation every single week. So once again, Patrick Mahomes looks pretty good in the top stacks tool. Are you confident in any of these receivers? Do you have a stand? Are you taking any kind of stand on the Kansas City receivers? Anybody that you like more than others?
It's just gonna have to be Kelsey to Mahomes for me at this point. Last week was a disaster. I played a bunch of the Chiefs passing game, and Mahomes was great. Kelsey was great, and the wide receivers, it's so spread out that unless one of them breaks off a big play, there's just not enough volume for anybody. So we'll go through last week where Mahomes had over 300 passing yards, and here's where the targets went to. Pulling up the game log, and it was a game against the Chiefs too. I guess they could have had a bigger game had it been competitive, but games are not competitive against the Rams these days. So we had Kelsey, who had 8 targets, caught 4 of them, 57 yards and a touchdown. Here beyond that was how the targets and catches were allocated. 4 went to MVS, 3 to Juju. Sky Moore had 5 catches. Justin Watson had 2 catches. Jody Fortson had 2 catches. McKinnon out of the backfield had 3. Ronald Jones got some work. He had a catch. Noah Gray, the second tight end, he had 2 catches. That's ridiculously spread out. There was, let's do some math. So Kelsey, MVS, Juju, Sky Moore, Watson, Fortson, McKinnon, Ronald Jones, Pacheco. 10 different players caught a pass, and none of them caught more than 5 passes. I'm not sure that's going to change going forward, and that does make it pretty hard for me to make double stacks with Patrick Mahomes. So I think I'm going to be more focused on just Mahomes and Kelsey.
I get that. I think I'm still on the other side. I still think that I'm going to try these double stacks. What I can't help myself with is these guys are so cheap. Like Justin Watson is 3,200. He played 84% of snaps last week in this Chiefs. Like a guy getting 84% of snaps in this Chiefs offense. It's really hard for me to not want to play him, especially in a game where they are going to need to be, throwing the ball. Most likely, it's a tougher spot. Like they're going to need to probably play through the end of the game against the Bengals. So it's really hard for me to not want to play Justin Watson if he's going to be getting 84% of snaps in this Chiefs offense in a game where I think they're probably going to need to throw a little bit more. So 3,200 Justin Watson, I have some interest in. Sky Moore, Justin Watson 3,200. Sky Moore 3,100. Only played 46% of snaps in the last game, but as you said, I think he had 5 catches in that game. He seems to be getting more involved in the offense. He's clearly got some explosiveness to him. Hasn't put it together yet, but I think that we're trending towards him. Sky Moore has been having more and more opportunities. So kind of like Sky Moore at 3,100. And then MVS, once again, I more or less predicted, I guaranteed a touchdown last week, and then it didn't happen. So I was disappointed in that. I think he actually had a target in the end zone and it just didn't work out. But 4,100, I think I'm going to keep falling for it. I get it if you want to jump off these Kansas City receivers, as you're saying you're going to do, Greg, but I can't help myself having some interest in receivers in this offense, because the other options are guys in bad offenses that are getting, the same kinds of snap counts, at least maybe getting better target shares. But I do still have some interest in these Kansas City receivers.
Yeah, for me, I'm going to be focusing on Kelsey, and we could use that to pivot and talk about tight ends. Now, he's more expensive than every other tight end by a mile. The ownership, pretty modest, projected for 14% this weekend, which part of it is just because he's so much more expensive than everybody else. If I have the ability to spend up for Mark Andrews, I'll do it. If I have the ability to spend up for Travis Kelsey, I'll be doing that as well as frequently as possible. Do you have an issue with any of those two guys? And then who are you going to look to for salary savings at tight end?
I totally missed the transition to tight end there. It was a quick and good one there, because I totally did not even hear it until you said the names. I was like, wait, Travis Kelsey? Yeah, I don't have any issue at all with going to Travis Kelsey or Mark Andrews. I think that they are the cream of the crop at tight end pretty clearly. So yeah, I like both of those calls. We have Kelsey at 14% ownership, 14.3% chance to be an optimal. Obviously, if you can afford 7,900 in your tight end spot, you're going to Kelsey. And then Mark Andrews, we've got at 6.1% ownership, 7.4% chance to be an optimal. He's 6,600. I think I might consider doing some skinny stacks with Lamar and Mark Andrews. Not a really strong stand there. I'm probably not going to it a ton, but it's playable. The price is right there. And then, we talked about, maybe I'll do some Pittsburgh stacks. Pat Freiermuth is just 4,300. We have him project for 13% ownership, which seems high, but then 14.3% chance to be an optimal. It's obviously a great spot against this Atlanta defense. I think Pat Freiermuth is a talented young tight end. The price is right. So I think I'll probably go back there. George Kittle actually looks pretty phenomenal here at 5,000 against a Dolphins defense that is just not that great. 5.2% projected ownership on Kittle, 8.9% chance to be an optimal. Looks like one of the better bets on the board. I'll be going there some. Again, we talked about that Viking stack being very underowned. TJ Hawkinson has just been very involved in the passing game since joining the Vikings. So he's 5,200, but the price is right there. 5.4% projected ownership, 8.5% chance to be an optimal. Sign me up for some Hawk. Man, David Njoku looked so good in the tools early in the week, and now he's been ruled out. So Harrison Bryant coming in, he's 2,700. We've got him a project for 7.2% ownership, 8.2% chance to be an optimal. So it doesn't look quite as good as David Njoku does, but I'm still going to have some interest there. Do you want to respond to any of those names before I list them all off?
No, I just want to say that there are tight ends that I really like across different price points today. So if I'm going all the way up, it's Kelsey. If I am not quite able to get up to him, it's Mark Andrews. Then it's George Kittle. And then if I'm going really cheap and punting, it's Harrison Bryant. So Bryant's somebody who actually could end up being my most rostered tight end of the week, depending on how salary ends up working out tomorrow and I'm actually building out my lineups. But I just think it's such a good spot for him now. The potential with us now seeing Deshaun Watson as the quarterback for the Cleveland Browns, but also no David Njoku this week. So Harrison Bryant is going to be the sole tight end as a pass catcher. He's got an improvement at quarterback. And then also, he's so cheap today. He's almost the min price at tight end. So I think that Harrison Bryant, points per dollar, is the best tight end play of the slate. So kind of those 4 tiers, 4 different price ranges, those are the guys I'm going to be gravitating towards, depending on how much salary is left over in tight end spots.
Yep, that all makes sense to me. I'll throw out again Robert Tonyan. I know you said you're not going to this Green Bay offense, but Robert Tonyan just 3,200. We've got him projected for 2.5% ownership, 5.4% chance to be an optimal. It's obviously a great spot against the Bears defense. So I've fallen for this Packers offense too many times this year, and I'm going to fall for it again this week against the Bears. I think that just the prices are right, the matchup is right, so I'm probably going to go back there again to Robert Tonyan. And then I've also fallen for Gerald. Gerald Everett has been one of my favorite tight end plays a few different times this year, and every time I've played him, he's been fine. He just hasn't really put it together. But again, against this Raiders defense, 2.5% projected ownership, 4.3% chance of being optimal. I think that I'm probably going to go back to Gerald Everett a little bit again at 4,400. I think we've largely covered the tight ends that I'm most interested in.
All right, so let's finish the show the way we normally do. First off, if you guys haven't done yet, thank you very much for watching. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. It is totally free to you. It only takes a second, but it does help us grow our channel out a whole bunch and helps us keep our content free. Neil, if you're building one lineup in a single entry or large field GPP, what would be your quarterback to stack combinations in that lineup?
And this is probably the toughest week that it has been to answer this question. Like every other week it comes down to like 3 stacks that I'm kind of interested in. I think though, I'm going to go back to Patrick Mahomes with Kelsey, and then I will double stack with the receiver. I think it's probably going to be Sky Moore for me. It's between Sky Moore and Justin Watson are the ones that I'm most interested in. I think I'm going to go to Kelsey and Sky Moore with Patrick Mahomes as the most interesting stack for me.
Yeah, so I had one. I was going to say Tua for low ownership coming in, but I've talked myself more into as we talk through the slate. Mitch White, Garrett Wilson, Elijah Moore. I think that is a really cost effective stack. It's very cheap. You basically play whatever players you want around them. And I do think it offers a lot of tournament and single entry and large field tournaments. Not a lot of people are going to be getting there. So that's what it's going to be for me. I'm a Mitch White believer. Mitch White. I know that last year also he was really good in his first game and he sucked after that. But Mitch White, I think he's got 2 good games in him this year. Mitch White, Elijah Moore, and Garrett Wilson.
We've come full circle. Early on, we didn't even talk about him with the quarterbacks, and people were asking us about Mike White. And I was like, yeah, maybe it looks a little bit negative leverage. And then throughout the show, as you talk yourself into Elijah Moore, then you talk yourself into Mike White, and now it's your top stack. I like it.
Yeah, that's how it goes. All right, guys. Once again, thank you very much for watching. Enjoy the games on Sunday. I hope you guys win all of the money, and good luck.